Hello and welcome to our next lecture. Today we continue with special education needs students, where we focus on teaching a foreign language to gifted learners. Well, let's start from our common activity. I want you to have a look at these pictures and try to answer the question, what do all these people have in common? Einstein, Da Vinci, Edison? Well, the first thing that comes to everybody's mind is, well, they were great people, right? People of eminence, and, well, they had some kind of talent, some kind of gift. But what is more, they also had some other feature in common, namely, they were low achievers at school, or some of them did not have any formal education. So today we focus on such gifted learners who maybe are low achievers at school, but that are somehow outstanding in a classroom. But at the same time, alright, as to the aims of the lecture, there are basically two of them as usually. Number one, to sensitize you as future foreign language teachers to the problems of giftedness, right? And number two, to give you some guidelines on how to deal with gifted students in your classroom. So let's start from the historical view on the issue of giftedness. As usually, there is a problem with a definition, and throughout the centuries, the definition had to be modified. If we have a look at the beginning of the 20th century, giftedness at the very beginning was an equivalent of high intelligence. You are gifted means you are intelligent. How intelligent? Well, if your intelligence score is more than 130, it means that you are gifted. So what psychologists really measured in all these tests, intelligence tests, was a general ability. But in fact, they were measuring how a person applied what he had learned. Because intelligence, I guess that you remember from your SLA classes, where it is something that is genetically endowed, right? It is something that is inborn. So it's really very difficult for psychologists and for any test to measure objectively something that is inborn. So even if there were some tests, they were actually measuring the application of the knowledge that was experienced by a person before, but not his inborn intelligence. And this approach certainly could not satisfy all the people, since it did not account for original brilliance of Thomas Edison or Albert Einstein, who, as you remember from my previous slide, they were not high achievers at school, all right? But definitely they were intelligent. How can we describe gifted learners, gifted children? According to Marland, gifted children are those identified by professionally qualified people who, by virtue of outstanding abilities, are capable of high performance. But have a look, there are also required the differentiated educational programs and services beyond those normally provided by the regular school program in order to realize their contribution to self and society. Of course, it is open to discussion whether the Polish educational system is able to cope with the gifted learners, and definitely there are more and more of them in the classroom. So what happens most of the time in our reality? Well, these students are requested to take some additional extra classes. There are no special programs that are implemented in the mainstream education. So it's not like that in one classroom there is a gifted child and other children, and the teacher assigns some special task to this gifted child. So he or she does not waste his time on doing boring. And some more definitions of gifted children. Well, this is the definition that was offered in 1991 by American Department of Education for educating gifted and talented learners. At some stage of our lecture, we make a difference between gifted and talented learners. But have a look. There are two actually main features of gifted learners. Number one, they possess potential to achieve the best results in many domains of science and art. Alright? So, such a child is just good at everything. Alright? At art, at sport, at languages, at science, maths, and so on, right? But at the same time, have a look. It might be a child who possesses potential to achieve the best results, but in one domain of science or art. So such a child may be a total failure in mathematics, total failure in physics or chemistry, but he or she may be. There has been extensive research on gifted children. In 1986, Renzulli, he worked out on the basis of various research findings the definition, a new definition of giftedness. According to him, this is the product of three interacting clusters of traits that can be applied to any area of human potential. So have a look. The first trait is above average intellectual ability. So definitely it's related to some cognitive growth. Now, high levels of creativity. And finally, a high levels of task commitment, which means that such a gifted student really is motivated to do what he or she likes. Sometimes he or she will do it at any price. So, well, maybe there is some talented, gifted child who is sitting in front of a computer and he or she will be a future Bill Gates. But if he or she is really committed to what he does, and at the same time he or she displays high level of creativity, well, maybe such a person. But what is interesting when we analyze this concept of giftedness is that giftedness is not just related to cognition. So this is the point that I made at the very beginning. Intelligence and giftedness, no, there is no one-to-one correspondence. Giftedness is something more, okay? It's not just reduced to intellectual ability, but it's related to some other features, such as, have a look, academic aptitude, intellectual ability, so this is what is related more to cognition, but also have a look, creative, productive thinking, leadership ability, visual and performing arts, and finally, psychomotor ability. These are actually 6 main areas that have been distinguished by Maitland in 1972. These are the main areas in which the children may demonstrate their giftedness. Well, I guess that you notice that all these 6 main areas related to giftedness may be associated with Gardner's idea of multiple intelligences. Psychomotor ability, well, it is related definitely to kinesthetic intelligence. So we may say that actually Maitland's ideas gave. And now let's pose a question. How can we differentiate a gifted child, a gifted learner, in a classroom where there are 20 or 30 other students. So now we focus on these characteristic features of gifted learners. First, we focus on the need that is experienced by both types of learners when they learn. The need that is related to experiencing a challenge. So, in the majority of learners, we have different motivation. This motivation ranges from extrinsic to intrinsic. And definitely we cannot say that all the students, when they learn for languages, they are, well, totally in extrinsically motivated. It depends on a number of factors, right? We are either motivated by our parents, by, well, pocket money that we are paid from our parents. We are motivated by some external factors such as, I don't know, some grants, scholarships that we are paid. We plan to go abroad, right, to pursue our career. Or we want to be promoted in the workplace. So these are all situations in which we are motivated extrinsically, right? So there are some external factors that have impact on our motivation. But there are also some learners who have very noble motivation to perform the task. And they learn, for instance, for languages for the very sake of learning them, because they like it, all right? Because they like different language culture. They like talking to native speakers, because they feel themselves better, all right? It has an impact on their self-esteem, for instance. So once again, our motives for learning for languages differs. Now, if we have a look at gifted learners, have a look. They learn well by having their knowledge challenged. So they need to have challenge all the time. And by being able to frame up questions that they pursue, right? They don't need teachers so much to set some goals in their lives, to motivate them. And have a look, they are more likely to show intrinsic motivation to learn. What is even more, they resist extrinsic motivational orientation, which means that they say, well, I don't care about teachers, what they say, parents, what they say. Now let's continue with these motives for learning for languages or learning anything actually. Some more differences are related to the purpose. In the case of the majority of learners, their purpose can be to reproduce or memorize information. So we may describe these motives as being superficial or shallow motives. Or they want to take ideas apart. Or they learn to satisfy some external criteria. For instance, they want to get good marks. They want to, to be appreciated by their, parents, by their teachers, right? But in the case of gifted learners, these motives for learning are deeper. They want to take ideas apart. They question and extend them by linking with what they know. And once again, they often resist learning for superficial or achieving motives. So they don't want to achieve. Now, a very important aspect of motivation in the learning process is related to setting goals. What we may observe is a striking difference in setting these goals in the case of the majority of learners and gifted learners. With the former, they need to be assisted to see the goals. In other words, they need some inspiration, right? They need some authorities, teachers, maybe native speakers, parents, And in the case of gifted learners, they actually learn well by forming an impression of where they will end up. So from the very beginning, they see there are goals. If you think about Edison or Einstein, well, definitely these are the people who had some dream, who pursued these dreams, and definitely these were the people who, at the very beginning, when they were working over some idea, they could somehow envisage what is at the end of this plan, all right? What is at the end of their dream. So setting goal is this aspect of motivation. Now, it has been observed in the gifted learners, it is also, there are differences in making links and using what they know about the topic. So, in the majority of learners, what we do is linking the information with what we already know about the topic, and we do it in a number of different ways. Either we are talking to ourselves about the ideas, or we build ideas in linguistic ways. Sometimes we think scientifically about the information, or we form images or mental pictures about the information, or we think of the key actions and use this to learn. So we use some strategies to link this information with what we already know. But in the case of gifted learners, they have some superior existing knowledge of a topic that is better differentiated and elaborated in a range of forms, either verbal, abstract, or semantic form. If it is semantic form, we are talking about so-called verbally gifted people, or imagery, experiential form, that are so-called visual spatial gifted people, or scientific mathematical form. This is when we are talking about scientifically gifted people. And finally, they do it in musical form. Well, let's continue the differences in the process of learning in these two groups of learners. As to the majority of learners, there are some individual differences between us, right? We differ in how fast and efficiently we handle information, okay? In other words, there are some slow readers and there are fast readers, okay? Slow thinkers, fast thinkers. We also differ in what we know about and how we learn, how we think. We differ in terms of learning strategies. We also differ in terms of using what we feel about ourselves as learners of the ideas. We differ in the way that we identify what we don't know about the topic. And finally, we differ in recoding what we know to match the teaching. So to summarize it, in the majority of learners, what we may observe are individual differences. There are no probably two learners in the classroom who acquire the knowledge in the same. Now, as to gifted learners, what we may observe is that this group is rather homogeneous. There are no so many individual differences. They are more or less the same. They learn in idiosyncratic ways. They are often not easily programmed externally and need to align what they know with teaching. They process information faster and efficiently, show cognitive efficiency. For instance, they have very good memory span. They show high efficacy in elementary processes that determine more complex processes. What is as characteristic of this group of learners is that they are very curious. They are good at questioning a topic or the ideas that we learn about. it might happen that if you have such a learner in your group, he or she may question what you say, what you claim about English grammar, whatever, right? They may even have some discussion with the teacher and say openly that the teacher is not right. They also need to have the opportunity to recall what they know to match the teaching. And finally, they often set unrealistically high standards and goals for themselves. Well, such a high standard or unrealistic goal may be really unrealistic for the majority of us, but probably for Edison, the invention of a bulb, or for, well, Einstein. Now, giftedness has been always an issue that has been fascinating the researchers. There has been lots of research in this area. From research findings, we know that children who are gifted, they follow a different path than the majority of children. So there are some qualitative differences related to development of cognition, right? As you remember probably from your educational psychology or psychology studies, there are some stages of cognitive development by Jean Piaget, right? These stages are fixed, they are stable, right? But what has been observed in these gifted children is that they are not able to skip some stages, but they go through these stages at a faster rate than other children, right? It was proved by Higgs in 1990, Lemper's 1987, and these differences may be observed at different stages actually of cognitive development of a child. There were also observed some differences by Michael Becky and Michael. They can do at least one formal operation task by age 9 or 10. I guess that you remember that formal operation stage is the highest stage that we attain at the age of, well, at the time of puberty, at the beginning of the time of puberty, when we are able to think about different phenomena in abstract terms. But this is actually the time when complex mathematics, physics or chemistry are gradually introduced to the curricula, school curricula, right? But in the case of gifted children that are able to perform at least one formal operation by the age of 9 or 10, so the majority of children at this stage are not able to do any complex abstract operations, right? And what is And now let's focus on the issue of metacognition and what it looks like in gifted children. I guess that you are familiar with the term of metacognition. If you are not, I will give you my, maybe the professional definition, but I think that it will appeal to everyone. Meta refers to some higher processes of cognition. In other words, when you are if you think consciously about what you think, it means that you are at some level of metacognition. So it describes how students become responsible learners regulating their own learning and performance, all right? So at some stage of our life, we are able to think consciously about what is good for us and what is not good for our learning process, all right? And what is interesting in gifted children is that they develop this self-regulation at a very, very early stage. And what is more, this self-regulation is at the highest level of metacognitive activity. If we compare it to normal individuals, definitely gifted people, gifted children, they know what really is good for them, all right? So what they should do in order to learn effectively. How do they do it? By monitoring the learning process or self-checking this process, by planning and goal setting. Do you remember from previous slides? They set the goals. And it's not that they just focus on short-term goals, but actually when they start any task, any activity, they all the time focus on the final product, okay, on the final product, and on long-term, they set long-term goals. They also, this self-regulation process also includes attending and rehearsing, defining, focusing, guiding, coping, correcting, solving. There are two terms that are frequently confused, namely giftedness and talent. Gifted learners and talented learners. Actually, this division is also made in our native language. There are zdolni uczniowie I utalentowani uczniowie. Well, let's have a look at definition of these two types of learners. Talented learners are these who display exceptional creative ability in areas in which they have been explicitly taught, while gifted learners also possess this ability, but in areas in which they have not been explicitly taught, which means that talented learners are talented because they are provided with some special input from teachers, from parents. They were presented with some innovative ideas, right? But gifted learners, in turn, were not provided with any explicit information, all right? So when you think about Einstein, there was no one who actually gave him the idea of how to arrive at relativity theory. So the term giftedness is used to refer to natural abilities, meaning something that is more inborn, innate, something that is related to, nowadays we would say, something that is related to genetics, right? In the literature, you may come across the term of aptitude or gift, all right? So have you noticed that there are some people who actually have a knack for languages? They don't have to work very hard. They don't have to, study, memorize a long list of words, but they just, like this, acquire all the languages. Have you noticed that there are some learners who learn languages faster and more efficiently than others? I guess that you have, and these are the learners who are described in the literature as the learners with the high aptitude, or in other words, the learners who display a high level of giftedness. What has been observed in these learners is also the fact that there are some other features that are common to gifted learners, such as risk-taking behavior, memory efficiency, intelligent guessing, or ambiguity tolerance. There has been a number of different studies which report that this linguistic or language aptitude determine final achievement, final success in a foreign language. This is what we know from Garton 1980. But once again, there are some doubts that remain about the value of such studies, because it is not clear what cognitive abilities constitute aptitude. The notion of aptitude, as you remember, was introduced by John Carroll. And there is lots of confusion about the very term. Because the tests that have been introduced to measure the language aptitude, but this is just to remind you the components of language aptitude introduced by John Carroll. There are basically 4 of them: coding ability, grammatical sensitivity, and rote learning ability, and finally inductive learning ability. You may be gifted just in one of these components. For instance, in coding ability, which means that you have very good ear for languages. You have no problem with Tiger language pronunciation. Where such a person does not have any problems with perception of the sounds. Such a person may associate a symbol with the sound and retain that association in his brain. As to grammatical sensitivity, it refers to ability to recognize the grammatical function of a lexical element. Well, most of you, because you are the students of Model Languages Department, you probably represent very high level of language aptitude and wouldn't have any problems to, deduce from the context whether a given word functions in a sentence as an adjective or as a verb or as an adverb, right? And you will be able to do it even without explicit training in grammar, right? Rote learning ability, so related to your ability to memorize information, related to your ability to make associations between words in a foreign language and their meanings, and what is more, retaining this association in your brain. And finally, inductive learning ability. It was proved in a number of different studies that the students who rely on inductive way of learning are more successful, right? So these are the students who infer or induce rules governing the structure of the language, all right? So they don't have to be provided with the rules from the verb. Now, how can we check that somebody, really possesses this language aptitude? Well, there is no better way to do it as to use a professional instrument, professional tool, that is MLAT. MLAT is a tool that was designed by Carroll and Sapon in 1958. MLAT stands for Model Language Aptitude Test. What is interesting about MLAT is that this is a test that is independent of a specific foreign language, which means that in this test is based on languages that are not native languages of students, right? And they are not target languages that students learn. They are based on some artificial languages, right? Some constructed, hypothetical languages. And therefore, this test may be described as predictive, right? Maybe in the past you had a chance to be tested by means of MLAT, and maybe you remember that there are different tasks that are related to learning numbers, memorizing information, or guessing from the context whether a given There is also another test that is called PLAB. PLAB stands for Pimsleur Language Aptitude Battery. It was developed in 1966 by Pimsleur. It is also used to diagnose some language giftedness in students, but it's more designed for adolescent learners. And LET test, in turn, is designed for adult learners. Mind you that there are no aptitude tests, language aptitude tests for child learners. Why is it so? Well, probably because it is believed that child learners are not able to, to pass such a test. Maybe they have some language aptitude, but in order to fill in the test, you need some metacognitive knowledge. And metacognitive knowledge is related with your cognitive development. So at the stage of formal operations, that is at the time at the onset of puberty, the learners may be assigned PLAB test, but definitely it's not desirable for any children. Now, what are the main problems with these two tests? There are still doubts whether LET or PLAB, whether they really measure aptitude. In fact, some opponents of these two tests claim that they reflect the final score from these tests. They reflect the general intelligence or academic ability of a student. What is more, it is also claimed that these two tests measure ability to perform focused, analytical and context-reduced abilities that occupy a student in a traditional classroom. Which means that the opponents of these two tests, they question whether a person, a student, Now, what about giftedness and how is it developed in our education system? Nowadays there is, this idea of equality in education, right? So special education needs students should be provided with the same chances, with the same course books, the same input as other students. So basically what happens in a classroom is that all the learners, they learn the same and more or less at the same time. But I guess that you know that gifted people, gifted learners, they need something more. They need to be stimulated all the time, alright? So this crushing comprehensible input that is I+1, as you remember, so input plus one item above the current level of knowledge of the student is not sufficient for them, because it's not a challenge for such a student to learn something that is too easy, right? So the main problem in education, in educating gifted children, is that they frequently feel bored, neglected in a classroom, right? Because the activities, the tasks are not challenging for them. So the whole educational system takes for granted that all the children develop at the same rate, but we know it's not true. We know that students have different needs, and what is more, as you remember, gifted children, they do develop, they do go through stages, cognitive stages, just like, other children. But the point is that they do it faster, right? Now, if we have a look at the biographies of Edison, Einstein, or Agatha Christie, all of them described in their diaries or interviews that they had very traumatic experience at school, all right? Which means that educational system does not cater for the needs of such students. What is more, many learners are evaluated negatively, all right? And finally, what about teachers' role? Definitely, teachers' role is to help these learners to find his or her gift. Some of these gifts may be somehow, well, blocked, hindered by some, institution. We've been already talking about differences between gifted learners and the majority of learners in the way they process information, how they learn. But now let's focus on something more practical. This is what you may see actually in a classroom. How can you distinguish a gifted learner from the majority of learners? Well, gifted learners are frequently bored with routine and not creative tasks. So you may think that, well, a student is a typical ADHD learner, but in fact, what we are talking about is too easy. It's not a challenging input for a student who might be gifted. These students also want to be perfectionists, all right? And they are frequently critical, even too critical, about their work. They prefer working alone than in groups. It's not just because they have, problems with social problems with interactions in communication, but it's rather the matter of pace. They have lots of creative ideas. They come up with innovative solutions to different problems. So when they're working with other kids in a group who are slow workers, slow acquirers, slow thinkers, they have an impression that they are just wasting their time. Consequently, they might be perceived by you or by other students in a group as problem makers, right? Because they question all the time what they do in a group. They may claim that their ideas in the group are the best. They question authority of the teacher. They may discuss openly. But at the same time, we may observe that their linguistic intelligence manifests all the time in different activities, in different situations. They have very rich vocabulary, so you may be impressed by the extensive, use of vocabulary. They are very good at expressing skillfully their thoughts, and they do it both verbally and in a written form. They also like reading. They may be very creative. For instance, when they write some letters or essays, or they have some role plays. Sometimes they have diaries, and they have some backup notes that reflect their creativity. Frequently, gifted students, when you open up their books or exercise books, while you may notice lots of different pictures, right? Different backup notes, different information that are very genuine. They also. Now, what does a gifted learner need in your classroom? Well, definitely, he or she needs other peers, but sharing his interest and being partners for a discussion. If you know some other students who are interested in arts, or in foreign languages, or in science, where you should group these students together, right? They also need challenges, but mind you, they don't like to be assessed, all right? They really like competing with other students. So think about different competitions, right? Language competitions, game competitions. What is really worth thinking about is individual class with you or with some other teachers. And during these classes, you may be a partner for a student and discuss the issues that you would never discuss with other students in a classroom. And finally, think about some additional extra classes, either related to practicing pronunciation. Well, unfortunately, many of the gifted students, they have problems with communication, with social interactions. So our task as teachers is to work over making them more accessible to other students, right? They need some guidance from you, how to improve their emotional social behavior. You may talk to a school counselor on training his or her assertiveness or leadership behavior or self-confidence. Most of the time, these students are very self-confident, they are very assertive, but they might have problems with confusing assertiveness with being rude, and they might have problems with leadership as well. Well, you should also think about extending their knowledge on various techniques of learning effectively. Maybe fast reading course is a good idea, making mind maps or mnemotechniques, and techniques of creative thinking. And because frequently gifted students that are so occupied with what they really like may have no time for, physical activities. So it's a good idea to talk to their parents and, maybe encourage the students. Well, thank you very much for your attention and for your patience. I wish you good luck in your teaching, and I wish you lots of